The rain fell softly over the green hills, as it had for thousands of years. Mists clung to the valleys, curling like ancient ghosts over the stones of forgotten monuments. Long before the name United Kingdom ever existed, before kings and queens and crowns and empires, this land was a wild and untamed island at the edge of the known world, a place where the wind carried the whispers of old gods, and the soil was soaked with the footsteps of countless generations. This is the story of Britain, a story that stretches across millennia, shaped by invasion and resistance, by invention and revolution, by triumph and tragedy. It is the tale of how a scattered collection of tribes became a kingdom, how that kingdom became an empire, and how that empire became the modern nation we know today. But to understand Britain, we must begin in the age before history, when the island was home to mysterious peoples whose names have long been lost. Thousands of years before Christ, early humans crossed into this land, hunting, gathering, and slowly learning to farm. They left behind the silent monuments that still rise from the earth today, the great stone circles like Stonehenge, built with impossible precision to mark the movements of the Sunday. No one knows exactly what rituals were performed there, or why so many of these stones were dragged across miles of rough terrain, but they stand as a testament to a people already deeply connected to the land and the sky. As centuries passed, these early Britons formed tribes. They spoke Celtic languages, wore intricate patterns in their clothing, and fought fiercely to defend their territories. They were not a single united people, but a patchwork of clans and kingdoms, each with its own chieftain, its own gods, and its own rivalries. And then, from across the sea, came the first great wave of change, the Romans. In 55 before Common Era, Julius Caesar arrived on the shores of southern Britain. His invasion was brief and mostly for show, a demonstration of Roman power. But almost a century later, in 43 Common Era, Emperor Claudius sent a full-scale army. The Roman legions marched with discipline and precision, cutting through tribal resistance and building the first great roads and fortresses on British soil. Not everyone bent the knee. In the year 60 Common Era, a woman named Boudica rose to defy them. She was queen of the Iceni tribe, and after Roman soldiers assaulted her and her daughters, she swore revenge. Leading an army of tens of thousands, she swept through Roman settlements, burning the city of Londinium, modern London, to the ground. For a moment, it seemed as though she might drive the Romans out entirely. But the legions regrouped, crushed her rebellion, and Britain became firmly part of the Roman Empire. Over the next 3 centuries, Roman Britain transformed. The conquerors built towns with stone houses, bathhouses, and temples. They introduced written laws, new farming techniques, and trade that stretched all the way to the Mediterranean. They also built Hadrian's Wall, a massive stone barrier in the north, to keep out the fierce tribes of Scotland. Yet the Romans never truly conquered every corner of the island. Beyond their borders, the wild lands remained untamed, and the old tribal ways persisted. Over time, cracks appeared in Rome's control. By the early 5th century, the once mighty empire was collapsing under pressure from invasions in Europe, and Roman soldiers were called home. Britain was left to fend for itself. The legions marched away, the roads began to crumble, and the island was once again vulnerable to waves of change, this time from across the North Sea. When the last Roman soldiers disappeared over the horizon, they took with them the order and protection their empire had enforced. What they left behind was a land fractured and exposed. Britain stood alone, and it would not be long before others came to seize it. From the shores of what is now Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, three powerful tribes began crossing the sea: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They were warriors and settlers, and they brought with them their own language, their own gods, and their own way of life. The native Britons, still clinging to fragments of Roman civilization, tried to resist. There are whispers in legend of a war leader called Arthur, who may have fought against these invaders, a man who, over centuries, would become the mythical King Arthur of Camelot. But whether Arthur was real or not, the tide could not be turned. The Anglo-Saxons spread across the land, pushing the Celtic-speaking peoples into the far corners into Wales, Scotland, and Cornwall. Over time, their many small kingdoms, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and others, began to form the backbone of what would one day become England. They converted to Christianity, built monasteries, and created beautiful illuminated manuscripts. Their language evolved into Old English, and their culture flourished in relative stability. But peace in Britain was never destined to last for long. In the late 8th century, a new terror appeared on the horizon: long, sleek ships slicing through the waves, their sails catching the wind. The Vikings had arrived. From Scandinavia they came, fierce warriors with axes and swords, raiding monasteries, burning villages, and carrying away treasure and captives. Their attacks were sudden, brutal, and relentless. Some came only to plunder, but others came to stay. They carved out their own territories, most famously in the north and east of England, an area that became known as the Danelaw. For over a century, the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings clashed in battles that decided the fate of the island. Kings like Alfred the Great of Wessex fought tirelessly to push back the Norse invaders, slowly reclaiming lost lands and laying the foundation for a more unified England. By the early 11th century, the Vikings had not only invaded, but for a time ruled England itself under King Canute the Great. Yet the line between invader and native blurred, as Viking settlers married into the Anglo-Saxon population and became part of the land they once raided. This uneasy balance might have endured, but history was about to turn again in 1066. That year, King Edward the Confessor died without a direct heir, and the English throne became a prize every ambitious ruler in the region wanted. Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex, claimed it. But across the Channel in Normandy, a duke named William insisted it had been promised to him. William gathered an army and set sail. On the 14th of October, 1066, the two sides met at the Battle of Hastings. The clash was fierce, but by day's end, Harold lay dead, an arrow in his eye, according to legend, and William stood victorious. He became known as William the Conqueror, and with him began a new chapter in British history. The Normans brought a new ruling class, speaking French and reshaping the political landscape. They built towering stone castles, restructured the laws, and ordered the creation of the Domesday Book, a vast survey of every town, field, and household in the realm. English society became a fusion of Anglo-Saxon and Norman culture, and from this mix, the seeds of a future nation began to grow. Under the rule of the Normans, the kingdom began to transform. The kings who followed William the Conqueror belonged to the House of Plantagenet, a dynasty that would rule for more than 3 centuries and shape the destiny of England in profound ways. Castles rose across the countryside, cathedrals reached toward the heavens, and the power of the monarchy grew, but so too did the ambitions of the nobles. By the early 13th century, tensions between the crown and the barons reached a breaking point. King John, remembered as one of England's most unpopular rulers, had demanded heavy taxes to fund costly wars and had ruled with an iron fist. In 1215, his barons rebelled, forcing him to meet them in a meadow by the River Thames at a place called Runnymede. There, under pressure, John set his seal to a document that would echo through the centuries, the Magna Carta. It was meant to limit the king's power, ensuring that no ruler could act above the law. Though its immediate impact was limited, its legacy would shape not only England's future, but the very idea of constitutional government. The Plantagenet era was one of grandeur, but also of suffering. In the mid-14th century, a plague arrived in England, the Black Death. It swept across the land with terrifying speed, killing perhaps half the population. Villages were emptied, fields lay untended, and the very structure of society was shaken. The scarcity of laborers gave surviving peasants new leverage, leading to social unrest and uprisings like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. And yet, life went on. England fought a long and exhausting conflict with France known as the 100 Years' War, producing legendary figures like Joan of Arc on the French side and King Henry V on the English, whose victory at Agincourt in 1415 became the stuff of national pride. But the war drained the kingdom's coffers and weakened the crown's authority. By the mid-15th century, England was once again plunged into chaos, this time by a civil war between rival branches of the royal family. The House of Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by the white, fought for control of the throne. This brutal conflict, known as the Wars of the Roses, saw kings dethroned, nobles executed, and entire battles decided by betrayal. In 1485, the struggle came to its bloody climax at the Battle of Bosworth Field. There, Richard III of the House of York fell in battle, and a new ruler took the crown, Henry Tudor. He became King Henry VII, marrying Elizabeth of York to unite the feuding houses and creating a new dynasty, the Tudors. Under their reign, England would enter an age of transformation, ambition, and empire building unlike anything it had ever seen. The Tudor dynasty began with a promise of unity, but it would soon become one of the most dramatic and turbulent eras in British history. Henry VII, cautious and calculating, restored stability after decades of war. Yet it was his son, Henry VIII, who would forever change the face of England. Henry VIII was charismatic, ambitious, and larger than life. In the early years of his reign, he was celebrated as a Renaissance prince, athletic, intelligent, and cultured. But his desire for a male heir would drive him into conflict with the most powerful institution in Europe, the Catholic Church. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke away from Rome entirely, declaring himself head of the Church of England. It was a seismic shift that not only reshaped religion in England, but also set off decades of turmoil. Henry's 6 marriages, his executions of those who opposed him, and his dissolution of the monasteries made him one of the most controversial monarchs in history. When he died in 1547, his young son Edward VI inherited the throne. But his reign was short, and the kingdom fell into uncertainty. Mary first, Henry's Catholic daughter, came next. She sought to restore the old faith, earning the grim nickname Bloody Mary for the persecution of Protestants. But her reign was followed by that of her half-sister, Elizabeth I, who would go on to become one of England's greatest rulers. Elizabeth's reign, known as the Elizabethan Age, was a golden era of exploration, culture, and national pride. The arts flourished. William Shakespeare's plays captured the human spirit in ways that still resonate today. English ships, led by men like Sir Francis Drake, sailed to the far corners of the globe, challenging Spanish dominance. In 1588, Elizabeth's navy defeated the mighty Spanish Armada, cementing England's status as a rising naval power. But Elizabeth died without an heir in 1603, and the crown passed to her cousin James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. This union of crowns brought England and Scotland under a single monarch, though they remained separate kingdoms. The Stuart dynasty had begun, and with it came new tensions. James's belief in the divine right of kings put him at odds with Parliament, a struggle that deepened under his son, Charles I. Charles's refusal to compromise on matters of taxation and religion led to a breakdown of trust. By 1642, the kingdom was at war with itself. The English Civil War pitted royalist supporters of the king against parliamentarians, led by the determined Oliver Cromwell. After years of bloody conflict, the unthinkable happened. Charles I was captured, tried, and executed in 1649. England was declared a republic, and Cromwell ruled as Lord Protector. Yet the experiment in republican government did not last. After Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored in 1660 under Charles II, a king remembered for his charm, wit, and love of pleasure. But religious and political divisions persisted, and when his brother James II took the throne, fears of a return to Catholic absolutism sparked a revolution. In 1688, Parliament invited William of Orange and his wife Mary to take the crown in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. James fled, and the new monarchs accepted a Bill of Rights that limited royal power and affirmed Parliament's authority. It was a turning point the monarchy would endure, but never again as an absolute force.